Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Chris Taylor, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, welcome to Authors Love Readers podcast. This week we have Chris Taylor joining us from, as you will soon hear, Australia. Chris and I met 2 years ago, I think. So you're a pretty recent one at the Novelist Inc. conference. And we just hit it off and saw each other again this year because this brave soul travels all the way from Australia to come to the Novelist Inc. conference and join up with all the other writers writing in popular fiction. Chris, tell us a little bit about what you write.
Hi, Pat. It's so lovely to be here all the way back in Australia. And we are baking in the heat down here. I know you guys are probably all rugged up for winter, but I tell you what, I am sitting in the air conditioning.
I have an Afghan over my lap because I'm chilly.
And I have sweat dripping down. No, just kidding, but it is so hot.
So, Chris, tell us a little bit about what you write.
So I write romantic suspense, but it's set in Australia. So very early on in my writing career, I was told to write about what I know. And even though I had read a lot of American stories and loved American stories, I knew about Australia. I live here, and so I base all of my stories in Australia.
Do you think there's any difference between U.S. written and or set romantic suspense and Australian set romantic suspense?
I'm not sure that there's any difference in the story as such, or even really the setting. It's more just the language. And even though I try hard to make it, North American friendly, and I have a North American editor who makes sure the phrases that I use are something that you guys can actually understand. Every now and then I will get a note in the margin back from her, and it'll be something that, we say all the time. And she'll say, I know that I get this from the context, but I have never heard this before. And, after 25 books, I still get that occasionally. So that's always funny because I try really hard to make sure that you guys can understand it.
Is there a phrase you're particularly aware of that North Americans don't get that you use a lot?
Oh, man, I should have come up with one off the top of my head. There are always some things, and it's really common sort of things down here. I mean, apart from the language differences, like boot, a boot for us is your trunk. And, we use a torch as in something like you call a flashlight. And,
yes.
The sidewalk is our footpath and, just words like that. But there are definitely sayings, and I'll think of one when we finish, I'm sure. But my editor will say, this is an Australianism, she calls it an Australianism. I get it from the context, but I've never heard this before.
Now, I've heard that Australians tend to shorten a lot of things. Do you see a lot of words or phrases?
Yes, we definitely shorten names. Like, we'd never call anyone by their real name. If it's Michael, it's Mick. If it's, no, it's true. And we didn't realize that was an Australian thing until, you kind of start traveling and meeting other people. But we always shorten people's names. I don't know why.
Before we started the recording, we were talking about that Chris never goes by Christine, and I sometimes go by Patricia for writing, but I always wonder why I use that because it makes me feel like I'm in trouble. But you couldn't get much shorter than Chris, and I couldn't get much shorter than Pat. So
I totally relate, though, Pat. All my childhood, if I was in trouble, my mother would be going, Christine, and that's the only time I got called my full name. I don't know what it is. It's a parent thing, I think, but no, definitely. Well, Chris, I chose Chris deliberately because it was, an androgynous name, really. And I had read somewhere that male readers will pick up a book by an unknown author. They'll pick up a male author if the author's unknown to them. before they'll pick up an unknown female author. So I thought, well, this gives me a bet each way in the male market, and it has absolutely worked. I've got quite a lot of male readers, and often they write to me and say, "Dear Mr. Taylor," and then they will tell me how they've never read a romance book, but they picked up one of mine, because my covers are certainly not, they don't, I write romantic suspense, and it's probably 50-50. So my covers, certainly I've got no bare chests or anything like that. They're more a thriller cover than a romance cover. So they picked them up, and then they said, "I've never read romance, and now I've read the whole series." And it's funny that they assume I'm a man, even though I go by Chris, but in the back of the book, I certainly, confess that I'm a wife and mother, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, let's let the readers get to know you a little bit better with some fun questions here. I think they're fun. You may not.
Hit them with them.
Do you have any surprising jobs that you've held?
Oh, I had the usual jobs as a teenager, waitressing, and I worked at KFC for a while and that sort of thing. But one thing you guys might not do over there, I'm not sure, but is cotton chipping. So what that is, I live in a cotton growing area. It's one of the main crops grown here. And as kids, teens into our college years and whatever, you would go cotton chipping in the summer, which is actually hoeing out weeds in the cotton. So you've got a hoe, and you just walk up and down the rows for 8 hours in the heat, and you chip out weeds. But it was good money, and I met my husband that way when I was 15. So, I have a fondness for cotton chipping.
That's a great expression. I had never heard that.
Yes, well, we used to get backpackers a lot, overseas backpackers, and sometimes they would chip out the cotton, because that's what it was called, cotton chipping. So they would be going around chipping out all the cotton instead of the weeds.
Do you have any strong fears, and do any of them have to do with cotton? And do you use them in books?
No, nothing to do with cotton, but oh my goodness, yes, I am terrified of spiders. Probably not to the extent of a phobia, but although when I was younger, I certainly probably did have a phobia, and only just the big black ones, like not daddy long legs, not every spider, but anything that looks, fearsome. And yes, I have used a gigantic man-eating spider in one of my books.
Which book? Can you tell us the title?
It hasn't got a title as yet. It's one of my most recent books. And yes, my protagonist gets hunted by this enormous spider. And it gave me shivers just to write it.
I guess if you can scare yourself, it's a good sign, right?
Yes, that's what I figure.
Okay, so what's your favorite taste?
Okay, so I am a sweet person. You're either sweet or savory. I will skip the main meal every time and go straight to dessert. So I love salted caramel anything, but salted caramel ice cream is my absolute favorite.
Oh, good choice. Favorite color and why? Do you have associations with it?
Okay, so it used to be green when I was younger, and I'm not really sure why, but I just did love that deep forest green color. But as an adult, it's become red, and I wear a lot of red. And I know that's a bit corny because I write romance and stuff like that, but I love, a beautiful deep red color. And it does remind me of love and romance and passion and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, my bedroom has these deep red curtains, and I've got a beautiful red throw on the bottom of the bed and, that kind of stuff.
See, now that I'm writing mysteries too, I also think, deep red curtains, they wouldn't show blood as much.
I'm hearing you, Pat. These things are important.
Do you have I know. Do you have a childhood book that got you addicted on stories that really opened that world for you?
Look, I was always an avid reader. I spent an hour each way on a bus with no air conditioning and vinyl seats in the heat and all the rest, and I loved to read, so it was a way to fill in the time. And I must admit, even from a young age, I loved mysteries and romance. I used to read The Famous Five and Secret Seven and Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys, and I always wanted the Hardy Boys to get with Nancy Drew, and they never, ever did.
I know. What was the problem there?
Exactly.
It was a natural.
Absolutely.
Any of those stories that you read in your pre-author days, did you decide they did not get the ending right and at least mentally rewrite it? I'm always curious about this because I think this triggers something for a lot of writers when we're quite young.
Yeah, well, I've got to say Gone with the Wind. I probably read that when I was about 14, I guess, something like that. And oh my goodness, Ashley Wilkes, really? I mean, really? Just could not believe that. And then all the stuff they go through, and no, I definitely had to rewrite that. I was just so disappointed. And I have read the sequel, and it's never as good and all the rest. But that is one book that I absolutely loved, but absolutely hated the way it all went in the book.
So how did you end it?
Well, of course they get together permanently and they love each other and all the rest. My goodness, we all knew they did. It's like, for God's sake, wake up to yourself. So now I make sure that I get that happy ending, even though all seems lost. Of course we know they've got to get together. That's how it has to be.
I don't know. I thought they were both kind of stinkers. I know that's not the popular opinion, but that was my view on both of them.
She was a selfish, spoiled little brat, but she did grow. There was that character growth where right at the end, of course, when it was too late. But he always loved her and was much more mature. And it just broke my heart that he just didn't give her that one last chance, that he gave up on them because he still loved her. And she wore him out. But, come on. I'm getting...
I would have been with Rhett. I would have said, bye, honey.
Well, I know she didn't deserve him all the way through, but towards the end, where she finally woke up to herself, I guess she got to the point where, no, they did deserve each other. But anyway, it wasn't to be.
So, okay, I've got to ask you now, because I suspect I know one that will not be on the list. What 3 movies would you take to my strange little desert island that somehow lets you play movies but limits it to 3? You only get to play 3.
Well, I am a huge movie buff. And I was trying to think of my all-time favorite movies. There are just so many, there are so many. But some that came to mind, Steel Magnolias, I absolutely love and adore. It's just a beautiful movie. And I know it's an old movie, but I'm old too. So, I love that movie, still love that movie. I actually own that movie and watch it, quite not often, but, it's a beautiful movie. I also love 8 Seconds. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. It came out in... it's probably the early 90s. Again, yeah. I'm showing my age here. And
it's about Lance Frost, right?
About Lane Frost, yes. And I actually used that rodeo kind of thing in one of my books, and and it just that was the inspiration for that. But at the time, Luke Perry, of course, was on 90210 and was the hottest thing out. So, and then he did that movie, and it was just, it was beautiful. And I own that movie, and I have watched it a few times, and I still cry. And the other one I chose, I mean, I could have chosen anything with Robin Williams in it because, he was just such a brilliant actor and always had just brilliant stories. But so I put Good Morning Vietnam on my list because that was another inspirational movie that I love to watch, and so it's on my list.
Can you see a thread connecting those movies?
I love the good stories. I love inspirational stories. I love stories that move you and want you to be a better person.
Okay. And when you say old movies, girly, I love movies from like the 30s. Those are old movies. Those are classics.
I agree with you. I'm a movie buff too.
Is there a saying from your parents that you remember them using all the time and now you hear it coming out of your mouth?
One of the ones, I mean, there are lots of different ones. I think my mother was very big on sayings. But one of the ones that she used to say when, if you're trying to get something by her, she would say, I didn't come down in the last shower. I don't know if you guys use that, but...
No, but it's wonderful.
So, yeah, I remember her saying that quite often, when we're kids. I'm one of six girls, so, there were plenty of kids around. And I remember her saying, I didn't come down in the last shower, as if, well, how do you expect me to believe that? And I have used that a couple of times.
Turning it on your kids now, huh?
That's the way it goes. That's the story of life.
Are you left-handed or right-handed?
I am right-handed.
Okay, on your right hand, which is longer, your index finger or your ring finger?
Now, this is a really weird question. I have never, ever looked at my hands like this before, but you know what? It's my ring finger. I don't know what that means about me or says about me.
I don't either. I don't know what it means. I'm just curious about it. I think it's interesting that it differs for people. Who
Does it
knew?
really? I didn't
But
know that either. So, okay.
yeah. And sometimes it differs from one hand to the other for some people. It doesn't for me. I have no idea. There's probably some significance to it,
It
but
doesn't for me either, but my left hand, the index finger is a little bit less short than the ring finger on the left hand. There's less of a difference.
so they're closer on the left hand than they are on the right hand.
Yes.
I thought that in my my palm reading days, wasn't it your left hand is supposed to be what you're born with, and your right hand is what you make of yourself?
Wow, that's
Except then I don't remember anything else from that. That's it. That's the extent.
that's totally unhelpful, Pat.
We'll have to do some research on it. And as long as I brought up the R word, let's go ahead and talk about, because writing romantic suspense in particular, you must have to do a lot of research. How do you do it?
Yes, well, I'm lucky that I had a medical background. At one stage, I was a nurse for a few years, and I also was a lawyer for a lot longer years. So I had a legal background, and I've done a medical romantic suspense series, and I'm in the middle of a legal series at the moment. So I do call on a lot of past experience, and I also have your equivalent to the FBI. We've got the AFP, which is the Australian Federal Police, same kind of thing as the FBI. And so I have one of their retired supervisors or superintendents on my speed dial, and he answers any technical questions about the police and that sort of thing, because I often have a police investigation going on. And in fact, my hero or heroine is quite often a police officer or a detective. So that's really handy. I also have a contact in the state morgue. So I've done some scenes in the morgue and that sort of thing. And as a nurse, I actually watched autopsies. So I have been inside there and seen all that happen. So that helps. I'm not someone, I love historical romance, but I just could not spend all that time on the research to get it right. And I'm someone who, it has to be right. So I will not go there, because I just know I'm too impatient for the story to begin. And I just like to get in it and start writing. I don't want to be pulled out all the time or spend months doing the research ahead of time. So I've stayed well clear of historical romance, even though I absolutely love to read it.
How did you develop these connections with the retired gentleman from the AFP and your other sources?
Okay. So I'm lucky. One of my sisters works for the Australian government. She's a diplomat. And so the federal police are based in Canberra. I mean, they have offices around in the other capital cities, but their headquarters are in Canberra. So she knew this fellow through her work, because she often deals with the Australian Federal Police.
Wow.
So she got me into contact with him, and I haven't actually ever met him face to face, but we've spoken on the phone, and I email, every book I write to him about something or other. And it's always just, hi, hey, going, what do I do in blah, 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 or what would happen if blah, blah, blah. And he just comes back, like he hasn't heard from me for a month or two, and then, and he's just straight back with the answer. So it's really handy. And as for the state morgue, I actually called them, and explained I was an author and whatever, and that I needed, could I speak to somebody about this? And anyway, they said that they would, get someone from their media department to call me back. And so, within 10 minutes or so, I got a call back, and I explained again who I was to this fellow. And he said, yes, I know, I've looked you up. So they actually did a bit of a search, because I guess they get calls from crazies and that kind of thing. So they'd gone on, he'd looked at my website and whatever, and realized I was, a legitimate author writing, crime kind of novels. And anyway, so he's been very helpful as well. I write to email him or speak to him sometimes when I'm dealing with that kind of stuff.
Well, those are great sources, because I find sometimes that when you find somebody like that who will enter into the what if, they are precious. I did a course in forensics at a place in North Carolina a few years ago, and the guy was great, but he was also telling us a lot of times what usually happened. And I would be saying, yeah, but what if? And he'd say, well, but that doesn't usually happen. I said, yeah, but what if? And at one point he said, don't ever go into crime. You are the devil's spawn. I know. Writers think that's a great compliment. My family wasn't as impressed.
Absolutely.
Okay, on behalf of a reader, I am going to ask you her question. She says, "Where do your stories come from? I know one author who dreams her stories, another has a character suddenly take up residence in her head. So, how are your beautiful stories born?"
Okay, so they're not necessarily character driven. I'm usually inspired. I watch a lot of true crime TV. I'm obsessed with that a bit, I think. In fact, my husband he does think I'm obsessed with it. And so because truth's often stranger than fiction. So often I will see something that it'll spark an idea, and I start thinking, well, how did that happen, or why did that happen, or what if this had happened? You'll start asking all those questions, and from there I can get a story. Sometimes it's a song that inspires me that I'm listening to. I have discovered Gretchen Peters. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she's been around for a long time apparently, but I've just discovered her. She's a country sort of singer, but she has the most amazing stories in her songs. And so I'm listening to one at the moment called 5 Minutes, and it's about this girl who's working in a diner, and she's on her break, a 5-minute break, and she's thinking about her past and the boy that she loved, and they've split up, and she's got a daughter to him, but they haven't seen each other for 20 years or something, I think. Anyway, it's just, and she's thinking, and then the owner of the diner, she knows he likes her. She could always have a relationship there, but he's not this guy who, she's still thinking of. And oh man, there is a story there. I am going to definitely write a story sparked from there. It's so emotional and so sad and all that kind of stuff. And I like to tap into the emotions. I mean, even though I have the suspense going, the romance is just as strong.
I like songs too, and I have a couple songs that have grown out of actually songs sung by Hal Ketchum. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
No, I haven't heard of him.
And that wonderful storytelling songs. So I totally understand that. The only drawback is you start with this idea and then you have to turn it into a book. So how do you do that? How do you start taking that story you've heard in a song? How do you create it into a book?
Yeah, it is. It's strange, but that's part of the magic, isn't it? That's the part I just totally love, coming up with a new idea and totally building this amazing story about it. So another example, I was listening to, I love country. I love country music. Like I could listen to national radio all day, and often do. But I was listening to a song by Alabama called "I Believe," and it's this song about this fellow who's lost his wife. She's died, but he can still feel her. He said, "I still feel you." And so my very first book was inspired by that. And I could see this guy standing, kneeling down by this headstone, and he's crying and he's touching the headstone, and it's cold, but he can still feel her. He can still feel the warmth. And that is a scene in my very first book. It's one of the very early scenes, this grieving husband, and he's actually the detective. And, the story goes from there. But man, I could see that so clearly, and it was just beautiful. It was great. And I just love that, whether I connect through a song or just something I've seen or even read. Sometimes I read this obituary in the paper once, in our local paper. It was an obituary, only the person hadn't died. It was just so weird. Yes, they weren't dead. Someone had written their obituary, but they weren't dead. And so I thought, wow, what is going on there?
Were they somebody well known in the community?
No, not well known in the community. At least I didn't know them, and I live in a fairly small community. I mean, some people would have known them, but there was something going on there that they'd written their obituary, like someone else had written their obituary. Thinking, wow, that's weird. There's something going on there. That is a story.
Newspapers write obituaries for famous people ahead of time, and then kind of fill in details, but they have them ready to go, basically.
Yeah, sure.
But it doesn't sound like that was the same situation.
No, this was just in the classifieds. So someone had just paid to put this. It was like an ad in the classifieds, but it was an obituary. Yes. Like it was only a small square, with stuff on it. Well, it wasn't that small, but it wasn't a huge page or anything. It was just in the classifieds, and it was just these few paragraphs about this person, only they weren't dead.
Okay, we got to use that in a book.
Oh, definitely. I haven't used it, but that is definitely going in. That is just, wow, what is going on there? They obviously hated each other.
Well, you get dibs on it because you read it, but I really like that. When you finish up a book, this is another question from a reader. Do you find that you miss characters? Do you think about them a lot? How they are going on from the end of the book? And then I want to add the question of, and has that thinking, if you do think about them, has that ever led you to write another book?
Yes, so I write series, so I do immerse myself in that series, and they're usually like 9 or 10 books, so there's a reasonable length of time where you're immersed in there. One of my first series was actually based on a family, so there were so many brothers and a couple of sisters there to make up the books, and so I did revisit the characters, and you do that there, you're like your family. I know that sounds weird, but you just feel like you know them, like they're people that you know. And so when things happen to them, you feel for them, and and you like to hear back from them. So I did a Christmas novella in the first series to revisit all the people that it came up at book 7. So you'd already met 6 of the brothers and sisters. And so I revisited each one around a Christmas theme, and that was so nice. It's like catching up with our friends.
And that you said you feel bad for them when bad things happen to them, but you are making those bad things happen to them.
I know.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's so weird. It is, but it just happens. You would understand as an author that the story just takes you certain places. I'm a planner, so I do plan quite a lot of the story out beforehand. I don't just sort of get an idea and run with it. So I often know a lot of it. But every now and then the story just takes over, or the character just takes over and does something that's so surprising that you think, oh wow, and it could be good or bad. You just have to go with it because that's what the story needs, or that's what they're telling you it needs anyway.
What that planning that you do before a book, what does that look like?
Okay, so it depends on how much time I have for my deadline. But generally, if I have I write fairly fast, so I publish every couple of months generally. So I allow myself about 3 weeks to write a first draft, and then I edit it. It'd probably take me a week to go through and do a full edit, and then it goes off to be edited back and forward. It goes through 3 passes back and forward between my editor and me. What was the question again? I've lost the train of thought.
How you're planning.
Oh, the planning.
What your planning looks like, what you're doing.
Yeah, so I would handwrite a rough draft chapter by chapter, just in point form.
Handwrite
in point form. So it takes me a couple of days probably to handwrite in point form chapter by chapter. But I find that I'm more efficient if I take that time, because I've got 5 kids, and so I'm often called away, and so I can just come back to my planner, my summary really, and know where I'm at. I don't have to go back and read where I was heading. I know where I'm at. I can just look straight down at where I leave it open on my desk, and and then I just continue on. So I just find that it's more efficient that way, because I get interrupted fairly frequently.
When you have books where the character takes off in a different direction from you, are those a joy to write, or are those harder to write? And which of your books would say was the easiest to write?
Okay, so it doesn't happen all that often. I guess I keep them under control fairly well. But every now and then, I wrote one about a serial killer. The man was the serial killer, and they had 2 children, him and his wife. And she was meant to be totally oblivious to all this stuff going on. And then all of a sudden, there's a scene towards the end where the wife turns up with the chainsaw. Was by his side. She walks in on him, and he thinks he's been sprung, but in fact she's part of it. She's. And I thought, I know it was too much. I thought, I cannot do that to those poor children. They cannot have 2 serial killer parents. So I rewrote that. I did not let her come in and do that. And she was never meant to be there.
So it was only to save the children, huh?
No child should have to go through life like that with 2 serial killer parents.
But okay, your most recent book, how much has that? It's say there's a continuum of easy to write, joy to write, versus oh my gosh, this book is going to kill me. Where in the continuum did the most recent book come in?
It wasn't too bad. It was another romantic suspense. I have my series mapped out ahead of time. So I have 9 books in the series. I've got all the titles chosen. And when I was doing this sort of planning, I would come up with an idea and just write a few lines down on each book. So I already knew, as I get to each book in the series, I know what the theme is. I know what the main story. I always know what the black moment is for readers who don't know that expression. It's where, particularly in romance, where you think all is so wrong, they're never going to get back, they're never going to get together, how they're so far apart, it's never going to happen. That's the black moment where you're just in total despair that they're ever, like I was with Rhett Butler. Don't worry, I'm still in despair. And then, of course, we resolve it. They get together, and that's a happily ever after, we promise, in a romance. But so sometimes the current book has it's flowed pretty well. I've recently started using dictation software. So, in fact, you guys inspired me at Novelist Inc. conference when you're all talking about Dragon and dictation software and how much more efficient it was and all the rest. And I tell you, I have been quietly impressed. So it's making me think differently. I think I'm using a different part of my brain, which is weird, but it just feels a little bit different to be dictating the story rather than typing it and seeing it coming up in front of me. But it definitely is quicker.
How do you make changes on the fly on Dragon? Because if I couldn't backspace delete and cut and paste, I would be in big trouble.
Yes, I'm with you on that. And I have only just started using this software on the latest book. But what I have been doing, because I feel that way too, I have been dictating just like 1,000 words at a time. So for about 10 minutes, it takes me to do 1,000 words. And then I transcribe it, and then I'm editing it straight away. So because sometimes as I'm speaking, I agree, I'd like to just backspace and delete or change something, but I don't. I just keep going until I do the 1,000 words, and then I just edit it straight away. So the thought or the deletion I wanted to make, the correction is still fresh in my mind. So that's how I've been dealing with it. I'm not sure how other people do.
I was contemplating trying dictation on things like emails because it's not as precise for me as writing.
Yeah, well, when you watch the YouTube videos and things on that, composing emails and stuff with dictation software is just so easy. It's like open mail, new mail, send mail to Pat, whatever, and it just pops the address in and all this stuff. It's just like, wow.
I might have to try that. But speaking of editing, have you ever edited something out of a book or had it edited out by someone else that you still regret? That you think, I wish I'd left that in?
There is actually, and I'm sure the edit was made for all the right reasons. So I write generally for the North American market because it's just, from a business point of view, it's a lot bigger market than the Australian market. Just you guys have got a lot more people than we do. Not that we don't read, but, there's a lot, it's a numbers game. So I was writing this book where this guy he was a returned army officer, and he had PTSD, undiagnosed PTSD. You don't realize this right until the end. But anyway, he had an affair. Okay, so there were a lot of reasons why. In fact, you find out that he was trying to break this terrorist cell in Indonesia and stuff, and to keep his cover and basically save his men, he sleeps with this Indonesian girl who's also a spy. My editor made me, no, I could not use that. It was not acceptable to have the hero have been unfaithful to his wife. So I had to get rid of that, which it was just so, yeah, I did. I mean, he still had PTSD, but he wasn't unfaithful. He still walked out on his marriage, but not for those reasons. So, but I still really loved that story. It was such a beautiful love story. And I like to write really real, and that happens sometimes. But no, my editor felt that it was not going to be acceptable to a North American audience that a hero is unfaithful, no matter what the reason. So that went, and I do mourn the loss of that.
Do you think it would have been acceptable to an Australian audience?
Most definitely.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Why do you think there's that difference?
Well, I don't know. I was guided by my North American editor that kind of thing wouldn't go down well in North America. In Australia, I don't know. I think we're just more not accepting, but we're just less. Gosh, I don't know what the word is. It would have definitely been acceptable in an Australian audience. We would have understood it and understood the reasons. And even though it comes good in the end, of course, they still love each other, and they and we realize all this stuff was going on. And I think it's a beautiful love story. But yes, I don't know why. I think that it definitely would have been okay in Australia, that it wasn't okay over there.
Now, other than the story where the wife of the serial killer shows up to join in, which of your stories has surprised you the most? And how did it surprise you? And did you learn anything from that for books that followed?
Wow. That one where the wife turns up, that was my first, well, it was my first book published. I won't say it was my first book because we all wrote books well before we got to publishing stage. But I guess that was the first time I had a character take over like that. And it was like, wow, how did that happen? Like, I'm the one writing this stuff. So I guess in later books, it didn't happen as often, but every now and then. And I just gave myself the permission to let that happen. I accepted that sometimes that happens, that the characters take over, where until then, I hadn't thought in those terms. As you say, I'm the one putting the words there. What do you mean that the character's taking over? It sounds really strange to somebody who's never done it before. But after that experience, I realized, that sometimes that can happen and sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's not. Like, I had to get rid of it because it just was too much for those poor children. But, sometimes it's okay.
Well, I've told the story before. I had a murder mystery that I was writing that came out a year ago called Look Live. And I was ahead of schedule, which I rarely am. I'm tootling along with this book and thinking, oh boy, I'm going to be finished ahead of time. And then looking at the screen, what do you know? The person I thought was the murderer ended up dead.
I love that.
I'm going, uh-oh.
Now what do I do?
This is a problem. So I got the book out on time, but I was not ahead of schedule. So I had to do some real rethinking. And it never occurred to me to make him undead.
Yes.
He was dead. That was it. There it was.
It's something I think that readers find weird because, we're the ones writing the story. I mean, I know sometimes I haven't been able to write the climax. Like, I often have, people getting killed or chased or whatever. There's always a threat that their life's in danger. And often I can't write that late at night. I do write late at night, but I can't write those scenes at night because I'm so scared. It's like, for goodness sake, I'm writing it. I know how it's going to work out. How what's going on here? But, it's like, that's the way it is.
So are there other ways you think writers are different from normal people?
Normal people. Yeah, that's right. We're so far left of normal, aren't we? I think that I do think we think differently, and I see stories everywhere. Like I wouldn't say I'm a particularly observant person, but I see stories in people and in actions and just sitting on a train or whatever, and you just see or overhear a conversation or something, and man, my mind's already off. Where I don't know that normal people think like that.
A lot of the authors are saying this, and I just had this thought: we're making a lot of normal people really paranoid about being watched and listened to by writers as they're out in their normal lives. You're going to be in a book.
I often get emails from people who, because I write a lot of murder and death and stuff like that. There's always chase. There's always the adrenaline pumping stuff, and I will get emails every now and then from people who, because sometimes I use the real names, the real suburb names and things, especially in Sydney and whatever. And I'll get people saying, "Oh my goodness, I live there. I live in that suburb. I'm still looking over my shoulder."
That's one of the things I feel bad about. My mystery series is set in Wyoming, so I managed to pick the least populated state in the United States, and I am rapidly depopulating it further.
Oh dear. Yes, one book at a time.
Yeah, that's right. But sometimes multiple bodies. So how do you think you have changed and evolved as a writer since not just since you started, but say since you were first published?
Well, it's like anything, any profession. I think that the more you do, the more hours you spend at it, the better you get. So I'm definitely more efficient. I am definitely less wordy. Like some of my earlier books were 120,000 words just for an ordinary fiction novel, which should have been around 80 or 90. So I'm much more efficient with words, and I love that. I love that I can just have a few words in a sentence and say exactly the same thing that I might have had 10 words in before. It just comes so much more easily. And I think, like any job, the longer you're at it, the better you get at it. So that's one of the things that has changed for sure, that I'm better at it and I'm more efficient at it.
Do you have a writing routine that you follow?
Yes, well, I write full time. I'm lucky enough to write full time, so it's my job. So I'm in front of my desk by 9 in the morning after my kids have gone to school, and I'll have a quick lunch break and I'll be back again. Like I would a job, and I sit here till 4 when my kids get home from school. This is in between. Obviously sometimes there's interruptions, and I have to go and buy food and stuff every now and then, which is an annoyance. But anyway. Generally, yeah. Look, I work 7 days a week as well, and I often will work. After the kids have gone to bed, I'll do another 2 or 3 hours then. So, but the good thing is, it doesn't feel like a job. When you're really into it, there's nothing like being really into it and just so immersed.
And when it comes just kind of its own, which doesn't happen all the time, unfortunately, but it is lovely when it does.
Yes, no, a lot of the time it is just getting that story down. But I think the more prep I do earlier on, the more I get to know my characters before I start to write, the easier it is. So even though I chafe at the delay, whether it's 2 or 3 days where I'm just nutting things out, in the end, I think it's more efficient because I don't have as many pauses where I'm thinking now, what would they do here, or what happens next?
Now, a reader wants to know, what is your favorite place to write and why? And does it have an inspirational view?
Well, I generally write from my office when I'm home. I use OneDrive on my iPad, so I can go flip between the iPad and my desktop. But generally, I like to sit in my office, and I do have a lovely view. I live out of town, so I've got a very nice rural view of the mountains, and I've got a nice pool in my backyard that I look out over. So I have a water view, I guess. So, and often I'm the only one home, when my husband's at work, my kids are away. So it's often me. I don't need to have music and stuff going. Like a lot of people need something going. I can just sit here in total silence. I've got enough voices going on in my head. I don't need any more.
You need one of those floating desks for your pool, so you can just paddle around.
That would be nice.
So have you ever had a situation that a reader wanted to know about this, when the cover image didn't match the character description? Have you run across that? And then she said if you have, she wants to know how it feels for the author.
Okay, so I'm lucky because I am an indie published author, so I have a lot of input into my covers. And I have used the same cover designer all the way through. So they get me and my books. So occasionally I have tweaks, of course, that the hero doesn't look like he should, or he's too young looking. Man, I'm 45. Everyone looks young now to me, but I no, he's too young. He looks like he's...
Go away.
You know what I mean? But I'm lucky in that way. I haven't ever had a cover that totally mismatches, but I certainly sympathize with author friends who have, because you've got this person in your head, and they're a certain way, and they look a certain way, and they've got certain, mannerisms and just some sort of bearing or whatever, and you get something that's just nothing like that. I can understand how gutted you must feel about that.
Now, a lot of your characters, I shouldn't say a lot, but you're writing in areas where it tends to be male-dominated, more males working than women, than females. How do you approach writing from the point of view, especially of the opposite sex?
Okay, so I love to write from the male point of view. I don't know why, but I guess if I have a choice, say if I'm writing single point of view and I have a choice, I will often gravitate towards the male character, which is weird because I have no brothers. I grew up with 5 sisters, so obviously I had a father, but I didn't have a lot of male influence as such. But I love writing the male characters. I don't know whether I get it right. I think I probably make them a little bit too emotional. I can always tell a book that's written by a man. You don't even have to tell me the author. I just can tell from the style, and particularly if there's any sort of emotional scenes, you can tell it's been written by a man. But so I probably am a little bit emotional, but I guess, the people who read my books do tend to be women too. So, we get it. We get that.
So this question is sort of out of the blue, but I'm interested to hear the answer. What's the best money you've ever spent as an author?
Okay. I think on my covers, they say, well, you can't judge a book by the cover, but we often do. And in this day and age of digital books, we have the covers in front of us. Unlike, in the old days when you had to go to a bookstore, I guess you saw covers too. But most people shop online now, I think. So the covers are really important, particularly if you're looking for just a read, you're not actually searching for a particular author. I think the covers are really important. And I probably spend on the upper end of the scale, not the most expensive for sure, but more than some on my covers. But I have had a lot of feedback on the covers that and even from digital retailers, that the covers stand out, and that, they're attractive to readers.
Do you have a favorite cover of yours?
It's hard to say because I do like all my covers, but
or one that's gotten a particular amount of feedback.
Probably my hospital series, which it features sort of a part of the building on all of them, and it's just a fictitious hospital I've set in Sydney. But they're kind of darker and grittier and edgier, those books, and the covers are all sort of reflective of that, I think. And they're nice and glossy. Some I do in a matte, some series I do in matte. And I love the matte cover as well. But the glossy really, that talks to me.
Now, you said that you have had some books set in against the legal background,
yes.
Right? And you were a lawyer. Were you a criminal lawyer?
Yes, I did a bit of everything. In my early days, I worked for the Director of Public Prosecutions, which, what do you guys call that? The District Attorney's Office, that kind of thing. So I did purely criminal law there on the prosecution side of it. But when I moved to the country, so that was in Sydney, I lived in Sydney. When I moved to the country where my husband lived, I became a country lawyer, so in a country practice, and I did a bit of everything. And then I was a defence lawyer. So that was really weird because, you're on different sides of the bar table. People probably don't even realise, but, the defence sit on the left and the prosecution sit on the right. And so all of a sudden I was on the other side of the table, and it just was so, even though you're only still a few metres apart, it was just so weird to do that. But yeah, I did a defence criminal lawyer for a few years, and also did a lot of commercial work and, conveyancing. You did a bit of everything in the country.
So if you weren't writing, would you go back to the law?
Yes, I would.
Now, that sort of surprised me because there are a fair number of authors who are departed lawyers, escaped lawyers. So that's interesting. So what made you switch from law to writing?
Well,
then?
I always loved writing, and I used to do that on my weekends and things, especially before I had children. I would be writing kind of Harlequin romances and things. It was only later I got into the suspense. I did try and write Blaze, but I just could not contain the word count. I was always had too many secondary characters and too many plots going on. So I realized fairly quickly I was a single title writer, and I didn't even know that term until I started talking to other writers. But anyway, so I was always writing, but I just love criminal law. Not so much the other stuff, but I love the criminal law. I've always been fascinated with that, and I think that's why I write about it, because it's fascinating. What makes a person get to that point.
How do readers respond to, especially your criminal stories? Do they, or any of your romantic suspense? What sort of feedback do you get from readers? What sort of interaction do you have with them?
Yeah, so I think the book that I get the most response from is one that was on domestic violence. So it was in the medical series, and the husband was a doctor, a very well-respected doctor at the hospital, and she was a nurse, the wife. And of course, behind closed doors, we realised it's so different to the public persona that he was showing everyone. And I get a lot of response from that, because I think there's a lot of people out there in those situations, and I get a lot of emails from readers who, sometimes it's the daughter saying my mum was in this situation, or one was my mum is still in this situation, which was so terrible, so heartbreaking. Yeah.
Dear.
But I think that one has touched a lot of people. I get a lot of letters about that, about domestic violence, which just, I like to do issues that draw attention to things I think need more attention, more public awareness. So that was definitely one I felt for a long time that I needed to get out there, and I get a lot of response from that one.
I have a question that a reader posed I think is intriguing, and I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. So if you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
Well, see, my favorite author, I have two favorite authors. One's alive, one's dead. So one of them is a historical romance author by the name of Kathleen E. Woodywis. Now, she was one of the first romance novels I read. I think I read her first book when I was about 13 or something. Totally loved her books. She just had the most amazing characters, such beautiful men, and just lovely characters that you fell in love with. So she is somebody I would love to have written with, just because she just could tap into to emotions so well. The other one I love, and he is, again, he's up there with her as my favorite author, is Richard North Patterson. So he has a couple of series, and again, he's a guy who writes from a male's point of view, but his guys are just so great. They're so lovely. You fall in love with them. His male characters, and he always has a fantastic story, that goes with it. So I would love to write a book with him.
So you're looking at these authors, not just that you enjoy their work, but what you could learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Their characterization and the way that they just, Richard North Patterson especially, he writes contemporary drama sort of stuff. One's a political series, another one's a legal series. He's got other books, but there is the ones that I love. He taps into the real situations that anyone can relate to, and some people would have been in. And they react in a real way. I always really liked that. In fact, when I first discovered Sandra Brown, and she is one of my inspirations, she was the first author I had ever read that, where there was a bit of swearing, people reacted in a normal way, in a way you would expect. It wasn't sugar-coated, and I thought, wow, I was just blown away the first time I read one of her books.
Now, those books are sort of in your same genre. Is that what you read for fun, or do you go outside your genre?
I do read a lot of that kind of stuff for fun, especially from authors that I really enjoy. But I also, I love historical romance. I love contemporary romance. I every now and then I'll read an autobiography, but not really for fun. It'll be just something I'm interested in, or some person, I'm interested in to know their life story. I'll read that for. But for fun, it's always romance in some form.
So somebody who has never read any of your books, and we'll say this from the North American market since it's the bigger one, what would be a good place for them to start? Which book would be a good start for them?
I was given some advice at an RWA conference, actually. I can't even remember who said it, but this was before I was published, so it was really timely for me. They said that you had no control on where a reader might come into your series. So I write series. I like to write series. But they said you might have book 4 on sale or something, and someone gets that one. And if they can't understand and enjoy that story on its own without having read all the other books, then they may not go back and fill in the gaps. Where if you write it as sort of a standalone story within the series and they enjoy it, as its own book, then you're more likely to get them to, go back and read or pick up another one. So I took that on board. So I've got 3 different series at the moment, and each one is a standalone story. I think you get more out of it if you've read it in order, because there is some reference back to previous characters, and so you realize that these ones have just had a baby, or these ones aren't doing so well, or whatever. You get a bit more out of it, but you can still enjoy any of them. So the first series is really a detective series on a family. The second one is a bit darker, a bit grittier, is the hospital series. So I deal with topics like domestic abuse and organ donation. I pick quite controversial things. That one's about illegal trafficking in organs. So it's a little bit grittier. The third series, the legal series, is a lot of courtroom drama stuff. So it really depends on what you like to read. I think you can tell that I've written them all. They're very much stamped with my voice, they're fairly hot and steamy. Most of them are. So I would recommend any reader pick a series and start at the first one, because I just think you get a little bit more enjoyment out of it. But really, they could come in anywhere and enjoy it if it's their kind of story.
I was at a mystery conference in Indianapolis last fall, and a reader came up. We were doing book signing, and she came up with, I think it was the 4th book in the series. And I said, have you read the other books? And she said, no, I'm going to start here. So there is a proof, at least one person out there that's doing what you're told about.
I would never do
Okay.
that. I have always, gone and tried to find the first one because that's just me. I like to do that. Even if the others are on sale, I'll still start with the first one. But apparently, some people don't. They dive in and see if they're going to like it. So yeah.
Do you have any of your books that you have a sense has been overlooked, not as read as much, that even your loyal readers might have missed some?
One of the stories that is very close to my heart is the 8th book in the first series. So it's called The Defendant, and it was inspired by my son, who was 12 at the time. And in Australia, well, probably over there in the States, I don't know what your age limit is, but in Australia, at 12, you can get a gun license, so a minor's permit. So you still have to be under supervision of an adult, etc., but you can actually get a gun license at 12. And we live out in the bush, and, my husband's got guns, and I've even got a gun license. He goes to the range every now and then. We're not hunters, but, we've got guns. And so my 12-year-old was really, really keen to get his license, when he turned 12. And so he did. He got his license. And, of course, then he just wanted to shoot everything in sight. I had a snake at my back door on the concrete steps, and, he's tearing off to the shed to get the 410 shotgun, I'm going, oh, my God. Like his mentality was like, let's shoot it, anyway, so that inspired that book. It's a very sad story, like that 12-year-old actually shoots somebody dead for good reason, It's a terrible scene between, with his mother involved. But the story is basically on the trial of this child, because he would have, it comes down to intent in Australia. If the prosecution can prove that the boy intended to kill and knew that what he was doing was going to kill, or had a fair chance of killing, well, then, you can be charged with murder. And so he was in the story. He was, and the book unfolds there. But I have had comments from North American readers going, "Wow, it's so different over here. This kid would never have been charged with murder and blah blah blah." But I write in Australian, so I follow Australian law, and that definitely would have happened. And anyway, but that's a book I think that I don't get a lot of feedback on. So I'm not sure whether it's not being as widely read as I wished it would, because it's a great story, and but that book is close to my heart.
Tell us how people can find out more about you and your books.
Well, I'm on all the digital retailers at iBooks and Amazon and Kobo, Barnes and Noble, and I've got them all up there on my website, which is just www.christaylorauthor.com, and people can just click on them and go to different links to buy. You can also order paperbacks off Amazon and CreateSpace. So, they are available.
And we will include the URLs in the show notes. So it makes it easier than when you're trying to catch something that's being spoken and you're trying to remember the URL. So, folks, you'll find them in the show notes. One of my very favorite journalism questions is to ask if there's something I should have asked that I haven't, or if you'd like to answer something that wasn't asked.
Oh, Pat, you've done very well. I mean, it's been a real pleasure to be here and answer your questions.
We're not done yet. So now this is my perhaps favorite part, where we talk about, or we do either ors. Okay. You just got to answer fast. You got to go right through these. Cake or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Day or night?
Night.
Cowboy boots or hiking boots?
Cowboy boots.
I think you've already answered this one. Appetizer or dessert?
Oh, definitely dessert.
Heels or slippers?
Slippers.
Mountains or beach?
Beach.
Dog or cat?
Dog.
I sounded not totally sure.
No, definitely a dog. I'm not a cat lover. Okay. I have 5 cats, but they belong to my 5 children. And yes, they all live outside.
Okay.
I'm not against cats. I just can't stand the fur they leave everywhere.
Hey, I have a collie. You want to talk fur? Okay. Sailboat or motorboat?
Motorboat.
Leggings or sweats?
Sweats.
I'm not sure this particularly applies to you, but we'll go for it anyhow. Which is eerier to you, owl hooting or coyotes howling?
An owl hooting or a coyote howling. Okay, so I've never heard of coyote howling because we don't have them here in Australia.
That's what I wondered.
But I can imagine it sounds quite eerie and lonesome. I mean, I've seen it on movies and things like that. So I think I'll go coyote.
Okay. Gardening or house decorating?
Wow, I'm not keen on either. I love a nice house and I love a beautiful garden, but I'm not, I'm not naturally inclined towards either. If I had to choose, I'd say garden.
Well, then that may be a hint to what your answer will be to the next one. Best china or paper plates?
Yeah, paper plates.
Mustard or ketchup?
We call it tomato sauce. Tomato sauce, definitely ketchup.
Okay. So the last one, would you save the best for last or grab the best first?
Wow, I think I would save the best to last.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciated it, and I hope that the listeners will come back next week to meet a new author. And in the meantime, have a great week of reading, and we'll see you next week on the Authors Love Readers podcast.
Thank you so much, Pat. It's been fun.
That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.